So rule numero uno, don't talk about the plate that I left right there that I definitely didn't realize was on camera. I don't want to see any comments about the plate. Yo, what's up, boys and girls? Swolelax here, and I'm back at it again from the video. This time, something just a little bit different. Today, let's talk about the state of cyber dragons. So normally, if you guys are a fan of this channel, then you guys know that I talk about a lot of GX archetypes. The GX anime was such a big part of my upbringing inside of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I love the anime non-ironically. Actually a banger. And objectively is the best of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes. You can fight me on that. And so typically when I'm talking about different archetypes that are close to my heart, I talk about heroes and I talk about cyber dragons. Half of you guys know me as the hero guy and half of you guys know me as the cyber dragon guy, which is kind of weird because I've always thought that I've made heroes a little more of the forefront, but hey, I'll take what I can get. Anyways, I've always thought about making a State of Heroes video for the 2021 formats, especially because we just got a new ban list and heroes are shaping up to be quite the deck. However, some new cyber dragon support was just announced and we're gonna be talking about that in today's video, along with the existing support and where cyber dragons are at now, where they plan to be, and how you guys can play cyber dragons inside of 2021. Cyber dragons have this really interesting rogue slot inside the meta right now, and I'm very curious to know how they're going to be shaping up with the new support coming out. With all that being said, what happened to cyber dragons and what is the state of cyber dragons inside of 2021? Anyways, cyber dragons were shaping up to be a really solid deck by I think it was the end of 2019 into early 2020. We were hot off of the Orcus format and Orcus Cyber Dragon was really good, Cyber Emergency was really expensive, and overall cyber dragons were a consistent combo deck that also had a lot of control elements to them. You had cards like Infinity, new link monsters like Zeger, great cards like Noxter introduced and also made widely available to the public. Hers was also very solid cyber dragon support that we got previously that allowed some more consistency to the deck. And on top of that, you had great cards like Cyber Dragon Core, along with things like Cyber Dragon Veer, and in addition, you have extra support within the Galaxy Soldier and so on and so forth. This light machine deck was looking to be a powerhouse with how prevalent it was. However, very tail end of 2019, early 2020, we saw a shift in the format away from prominent machine decks. We saw things like Heroes and Shadals and Altergeist, Invoke decks, Dinosaurs. Overall, a very interesting and diverse format, but not one that cyber dragons were particularly strong in. Now, I've always held this theory that cyber dragons are really good inside of formats that have a lot of machines or very prominent machine type decks. Well, no duh, Swolelax, obviously. That's actually something that's a given to essentially a lot of players. If you have the normal cyber dragon that you can tech in to use the Chimera tech dragons, then scoop up opponents' monsters, so on and so forth. But machine decks not necessarily being in the meta is not necessarily the only factor that contributes to cyber dragons being successful inside of a given format. Cyber dragons, similar to dinosaurs, exceed very well when it comes to very low negations. Formats where monster heavy negations that are very prominent can be beneficial for cyber dragons because of how easy it is for them to remove things. However, spell and trap cards are another issue that cyber dragons tend to struggle with because natively within the archetype, there's nothing that really supports getting rid of spells and traps. Yes, they have Cybernetic Overflow, which by the way would look beautiful in a secret rare, but it's a trap card, so it's a little slow. And in my opinion, when I played Cybernetic Overflow at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, Cybernetic Overflow is primarily used to, after you're done breaking the board, after you're done doing damage, you set that card face down to establish control. You're telling your opponent, hey, I broke your board, but now this game's mine. So it's not really a proactive card, it's more of a reactive card, if it makes any sense. But dealing with a lot of interruptions in terms of spells and traps is more of a proactive game. Yes, you can technically have cards that are reactive to the spells and traps, but typically cyber dragons want to be a very proactive deck. They want to go full force, end the game as quick as possible, or they want to do as much damage as possible and then set up control. But like I said, with the shifting of formats going away from monsters to the slow rise of spell and traps being really good interruption, cyber dragons kind of had a rough time dealing with that. Now, yes, of course, you could play going first variant, setting up your own interruptions with things like Infinity and Cybernetic Overflow, as I mentioned previously. But in this version, you're super susceptible to hand traps, especially with things like Gamma, Ash Blossom, and even people teching in Ghost Ogre, which would be devastating to your plays. On top of that, we also saw more powerful cards come into the format that weren't very friendly to cyber dragons. Dragoon, Predaplant Verde Anaconda, which you could technically use as well. Yeah, but it was better in other decks. Oh God, the blue light went out. Maybe it's a metaphor for the shifting times of Cyber Dragons. Anyways, where was I? Right, so essentially the format shifting really did mess up Cyber Dragons in terms of power. Now, not necessarily saying that they were bad by any means, and they would pretty much beat most rogue decks, and they had a pretty decent shot essentially into the start of 2020. But with new cards, new format, we also had Master Rule 5, aka the Yu-Gi-Oh! Update of April 1st, 2020. This introduced back into the game that XYZ's fusions and synchro monsters could be summoned to the main monster zone straight from the extra deck. No longer did you have to actually use a link monster, have those link arrows pointing down, and so on and so forth. This was Konami's way of addressing pendulum summons pretty much, and trying to curb the power on having you summon out a billion things from the extra deck as well. It slowed back down the game for a little bit while people were figuring out things, but then also sped everything back up. A lot of decks were more prominent inside the meta. All of a sudden, synchro decks, fusion decks, XYZ decks were hugely buffed, and this was a major change to the game. Now, just like with all other decks, Cyber Dragons had an ebb and flow in terms of what was good, what was bad. It was a slight buff to Cyber Dragons because you could summon your fusions to the main monster zone instead of having to have it in the extra monster zone. In addition to that, you could also use your XYZ monsters in the main monster zones as well. However, one of the major nerfs to this deck that happened was the extra monster zone not necessarily being as necessary as it used to be. Sure, link monsters still needed to go there first, and yes, technically you could also have things in there that are synchro, XZs, or fusions, but for the most part, players were just summoning those in the main monster zones anyways. So monsters like Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon were instantly nerfed by this change. This is actually a pretty big deal, and essentially was what power crept Cyber Dragons back down to rogue status after the big change. No longer could you just scoop up your opponent's monster and then maybe even scoop up your opponent's monster again. So the extra monster zone change was a huge nerf. The first strike being formats that don't necessarily favor how Cyber Dragons want to play. The second strike being a pretty big one in terms of Master Rule 5. However, Cyber Dragon players were more than happy to try to make this deck work in the current format. But I'd argue this is going to be strike 3 for Cyber Dragons. Inside of a given format where the meta is a little stale, maybe we haven't had a ban list for very long, people start to figure out the format a little more. The decks that were really OP start to become a little bit less OP. Certain cards get teched in, yada yada yada, the melee effect, right? Where you have a format that's been there for so long that people start to just kind of figure it out slowly by slowly. And Cyber Dragons is kind of like that, but in a deck form. Right? Like, follow me on this one. Essentially, we've had the same support for this deck for so long that if you activate a card, most people are going to know what it does and what it affects, where it sends, and then your combo lines from there. Cyber Dragons were a pretty linear deck to start with. Linear is a bad way of putting it. Linear sounds like it's like, oh, to like me summon big machine. And that's not wrong. But I would say straightforward is the more positive way of saying that. So there is an optimal way to play Cyber Dragons. People have definitive counters to it. It can't necessarily handle the meta, and rogue decks are starting to figure it out. So it's looking pretty bad for our boys. So people start to experiment. They start to play fusion variants, which are underwhelming. They start to focus more on the XZ's plays, which aren't as good. They start to hybrid the deck, teching in going second cards, trying to fit so many techs in there that the deck gets overloaded and you start to brick more often. What once was this consistent powerhouse at going second started to slowly trickle back down into rogue and eventually into table, I don't know, like 50 status. Now, that's not bad, the deck is still really good, but overall it started to lose its luster. And Heroes were right next to it, by the way, but the saving grace of Heroes is that they had Dark Law, which was really good as decks started to rely more on Graveyard. Cyber Dragons has dealt with what was on the field, but now with decks starting to have more effects that activate just strictly in hand and have to deal with in the graveyard, Cyber Dragons slowly started to lose it. Not only were they also a graveyard dependent archetype, they couldn't necessarily deal with other decks that could do graveyards much better. So overall, it's looking bad for our shiny boys. But on the horizon, we got an announcement of a new Cyber Dragon structure deck that focused on Cyber Dragon Darks? That's right, in our darkest hour, an unlikely hero came from the darkness, straight from evil Zane's deck, or Hellkaiser if you're a weeb. We got some new support in the new structure deck. I'm trying to find them real quick, just to make sure I get this right, because I don't want to be the dummy. That's like, oh, you missed a card. The Cyber Strike structure deck will include cards to Cyberdark Dragon, Cyberdark Chimera, and also a pretty cool card called Cybernetic Horizon, which I love the artwork on this card a lot. Now, what's really interesting to me about these cards in particular is that it's starting to move away from what we've been seeing from Cyber Dragons. The deck's reliance on its Link monsters and its XYZ monsters has been really big, but now Konami's been saying like, hey, you might want to give those fusions another try. Not only do we get a new fusion monster with just insane amounts of attack, we will also be getting a reason to potentially try out the Cyberdark engine inside of Cyber Dragons. Maybe playing one or two of the Cyberdark cards along with these new fusion cards and the Cybernetic Horizon spell card might be able to net you a few wins and make some really cool OTKs. On top of that, the card that practically wins over this entire structure deck is Cyberdark Chimera. Cyberdark Chimera is a power bond searcher that is reliable, that turns power bond, by the way, into an overload fusion. This card is nuts and I love it. I've been saying since my power bond video back in the day that power bond, the only problem with it effectively is that there's not been a reliable way to search for it. Plus, on top of that, you go negative whenever you're using it. But Cyberdark Chimera fixes that entirely. So now we have a cool new way to play power bond, which might actually make Cyber End Dragon and Cyber Dark End Dragon and the fusions much more viable. Cyber Twin Dragon could be good. Hold up a second. Cyber Twin Dragon, maybe not so much, just because Chimera Tech Rampage Dragon is gonna be buffed by this too. Irregardless, I'm gonna be so hyped when the new Cyber Dragon support drops. I'm gonna try to be making that deck. I might be trying to play the deck at tournaments. You guys know I get excited for new hero cards and I get super hyped for new Cyber Dragon cards, and I cannot wait to play it. Cyber Dragons have had a rough go at 2020 and 2021, just like all of us, but it's looking to be a bright future ahead, not only for Cyber Dragons, but for you as well. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Anyways, what do you guys think of Cyber Dragons? What do you guys think of the new Cyber Dragon support? Do you guys like it? Do you guys hate it? I personally think it's gonna be really cool and really hype. I'll probably be picking up 3 of the structure deck on release. And also, I'm foreseeing we get some cool reprints in this. Hopefully we get things like Noxter and Hers. Noxter would be pretty welcome, I think. Maybe some cool reprints. Lightning Storm, I'm not gonna hold my breath for that one. Ooh, Imperm would be kind of neat. Anyways, that's all I gotta say about it for today. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave it a like. If you wanna see more, please subscribe. I got a lot more videos coming in the pipeline, so stay tuned for that if you'd like to. But yeah, that's all I gotta say. Peace out.